Welcome to the Quiz Fix. I'm Cyril, and joining me as always is Olivia. Each week we dig into one real story from history, science or culture, and we close every episode with a quiz to make sure it sticks. Let's get into it. If you want to understand how American industrial power was built, you can't really skip Homestead, Pennsylvania in 1892. This was one of the most famous labor confrontations in US history, and it happened at the Carnegie Steel plant near Pittsburgh. By then, steel was not just another product. It was rails, bridges, skyscrapers, machinery, and the skeleton of modern America.
And the tension at Homestead was about more than just one factory, right? It was about who controlled the future of industry and what life looked like for the people making that future happen.
Exactly. The clash at Homestead grew out of a broader fight over wages, working conditions, and union power in the Gilded Age. The workers at the Homestead mill belonged to the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers, one of the strongest craft unions in the country. But Henry Clay Frick, who managed Carnegie Steel, wanted to break the union's influence at the plant.
Frick is one of those names that tends to show up whenever there's a big industrial showdown in the late 19th century. He had a reputation for being hard-nosed, even by the standards of the day.
That's a fair way to put it. Frick was determined to reduce costs and increase control. Carnegie Steel was incredibly profitable, and the company was pressing for lower labor expenses. In 1892, wages and working conditions became the flashpoint. When contract negotiations broke down, Frick announced that the plant would operate non-union, and he ordered the construction of a fence around the mill, complete with watchtowers and barbed wire.
That fence had a nickname, didn't it?
It did. Workers called it Fort Frick, and that name tells you a lot about how the men on the ground saw the situation. They felt locked out of their own workplace. On top of that, the company posted notices cutting wages, which made the conflict even more bitter.
So the strike wasn't just a sudden eruption of anger. It was the result of months of pressure.
Right. The union workers voted to strike in early July 1892. And then Frick took a dramatic step. He locked the workers out and prepared to reopen the mill with replacement labor. That's when the showdown escalated.
And this is where the Pinkertons come in.
Yes, Frick hired the Pinkerton National Detective Agency to bring armed men to the plant. The idea was to protect strikebreakers and secure the mill. On the night of July 5th and into the early hours of July 6th, about 300 Pinkerton agents arrived by barge on the Monongahela River. Word spread quickly through Homestead, and thousands of local residents and workers gathered to confront them.
That must have been a terrifying scene. Two armed groups facing each other at a steel plant on the river.
It was. There was a tense standoff, and then gunfire broke out. To this day, historians still analyze the exact sequence of who fired first, but the result is clear enough: a chaotic battle lasting hours. Several men were killed, and many were wounded on both sides.
This is one of those events where the name sounds almost too dramatic to be real, but it absolutely was. And the local people weren't just bystanders, were they?
No, they were deeply involved. Homestead was a steel town, and many residents were connected to the mill through family, neighborhood, and shared identity. During the confrontation, townspeople poured out to help the strikers. They also used rifles, makeshift barricades, and even a cannon reportedly loaded with scrap. The Pinkertons were eventually trapped and forced to surrender.
That image alone says a lot about the scale of the conflict. This wasn't a minor labor dispute. It was practically a siege.
That's a good word for it. And when the Pinkertons surrendered, they were marched out under hostile conditions. Some were assaulted by the crowd. It was one of the most explosive moments in American labor history, and newspapers around the country covered it intensely.
I'm guessing public reaction was complicated.
Very. Many Americans saw the strikers as defenders of working people against corporate power. Others saw the violence as lawless and dangerous. The strike became a national test case for how far employers could go to crush unions and how much force the state would use or fail to use in response.
And then there was an assassination attempt, right? Another twist in an already dramatic story.
Yes. A few days after the battle, an anarchist named Alexander Berkman entered Frick's office in Pittsburgh and shot and stabbed him in an attempt to kill him. Frick survived. Berkman was arrested and later became a famous radical figure. But it's important to say that the attack was not part of the union's official strategy, and union leaders did not direct it.
That distinction matters because people sometimes flatten these events into one giant blur of violence. But the strike had layers, and different actors had different motives.
Exactly. The union's main fight was over maintaining influence at the plant and preserving wage standards. Berkman's attack came from a different political world entirely. Still, the assassination attempt damaged public sympathy for the strike and gave Frick and Carnegie Steel more room to frame the workers as dangerous radicals.
How did the state respond to all this? Because once guns are involved, it's not just a private labor dispute anymore.
Pennsylvania Governor Robert Pattison eventually sent in the state militia to restore order and secure the plant. Once the militia arrived, the balance shifted decisively in favor of the company. The union strike lost its leverage and Carnegie Steel reopened with non-union labor.
So the company basically won the battle on the ground.
Yes, and the union was crushed at Homestead. Workers drifted back or were replaced. The Amalgamated Association suffered a devastating defeat, and steel workers in that region lost one of their strongest footholds. In the short term, Carnegie Steel strengthened its control over production and labor policy.
But in the bigger picture, Homestead became symbolic, didn't it? It showed something about the American industrial system.
Absolutely. Homestead became a symbol of the struggle between capital and labor in the age of big business. It also showed how industrial employers could combine technology, management strategy, private security, and public force to defeat unions. That pattern would echo through later labor conflicts across the country.
And it's worth remembering that steel was central to national growth. This wasn't just one factory making one product. It was the stuff that shaped railroads, cities, and warships.
Exactly. That's why the phrase America's steel heart fits so well. Steel was at the core of industrial power, and Homestead was one of the beating centers of that world. What happened there mattered far beyond Pennsylvania.
There's also the Carnegie angle, which always makes this story more complicated. Andrew Carnegie is often remembered as a philanthropist, libraries and all that. But this strike reveals the other side of his fortune.
It does. Carnegie was abroad in Scotland for much of the critical period, but he had delegated real authority to Frick. Historians still debate how directly he managed the strike, but there's no question that the company's strategy reflected his broader business philosophy. Carnegie later gave away huge sums for libraries, education and culture, but Homestead remains a major part of his legacy too.
So when people remember Carnegie, it's not just steel titan turned benefactor. It's also a reminder that philanthropy and harsh labour practices can exist in the same historical figure.
Very much so. That tension is one reason Homestead still resonates. It asks a hard question. How do we judge industrial success when it comes with severe human costs? the steel mills made fortunes and transformed the nation, but workers paid with dangerous conditions, long hours, and limited bargaining power.
Let's talk about the workers' side for a moment. What were they actually fighting for, besides pay?
They were fighting for dignity, stability, and the survival of union representation in the mill. Skilled steel workers wanted to protect wage scales and preserve a voice in shaping their work lives. In a time when many employers treated unions as obstacles to efficiency, that voice was hard to defend. Homestead was about whether workers had any real power in an industrial economy increasingly dominated by giant corporations.
And the timing mattered too. The late 19th century was full of labour unrest, railroad strikes, factory strikes, miners' conflicts. Homestead fits into a larger pattern.
It does. The country was industrializing fast, wealth was concentrating, and labor law was still weak. Employers often used injunctions, private guards, strike breakers, and political influence to break resistance. Organized labor was trying to build lasting institutions in a system stacked against it.
How did the public memory of Homestead evolve? Did Americans treat it the same way right after the strike as they do now?
Not exactly. In the immediate aftermath, many newspapers emphasized disorder, violence, and threats to property. Over time, especially as labor history became a field of serious scholarship, Homestead came to be understood more fully as a defining moment in the battle over industrial democracy. Today, it's remembered both as a tragic conflict and as a turning point in the labor movement.
I like that phrase, industrial democracy. It captures the deeper question: who gets a say in the workplace, not just who owns it?
That's exactly the issue. Homestead reminds us that the workplace is not just a site of production, it's also a site of power, negotiation, and conflict. And when the stakes are high enough, society has to decide whether the law protects only property and management, or whether it also protects labor's right to organize.
There's also the grim irony that the strike's violence may have obscured the workers' underlying concerns. Once the headlines are about gunfire and mobs, it becomes easier for the public to stop listening.
That's a sharp observation. Violence often changes the story in ways that favor the side with more institutional power. At Homestead, the company had resources, legal access, and eventually state backing. The workers had numbers, solidarity, and local knowledge. But once the confrontation turned deadly, the company could argue that order had to be restored, and the labor issue itself got pushed aside.
Still, the strike left a lasting legacy in labor memory. It became one of those foundational defeats that later organizers studied closely.
Yes, and defeats can be instructive. Homestead showed future labor leaders the importance of public opinion, legal strategy, and broader political alliances. It also demonstrated that workers needed more than local courage to take on giant corporations. Over the long run, the American labor movement kept pushing for stronger protections, even though progress was slow and uneven.
So if someone asks why Homestead matters today, the answer isn't just because it was violent. It's because it captures a key moment when modern corporate power and organized labor collided head-on.
Exactly. It's a story about steel, yes, but also about authority, representation, technology, and the cost of building an industrial nation. Homestead was one of the clearest signs that the age of massive corporations had arrived, and that workers would have to fight hard for a place within it.
And maybe that's why it still hits so hard more than a century later. You can see the outlines of so many later American debates starting right there on the riverbank in Pennsylvania.
You really can. Homestead is not just a labor battle from the past. It's a window into the forces that shaped the modern United States: industrial growth, inequality, union struggle, and the question of who gets to claim the benefits of progress.
A steel town showdown with national consequences. Pretty unforgettable.
Definitely unforgettable. And in a lot of ways, the Homestead Strike is one of the clearest reminders that America's industrial rise was never just about machines and profits. It was also about people, power, and the price of making the country modern. Today's episode is sponsored by Fyrebox. That's Fyrebox. Fyrebox is the no-code quiz platform trusted by marketers, teachers, and creators around the world. Whether you want to capture leads, run an assessment, or just engage your audience with something more interesting than a contact form, Fyrebox makes it easy. Start free at fyrebox.com. Welcome back. You just heard the story. Now let's see what's stuck. Coming up, a few quick questions straight from what we just covered. 4 options each. I'll give you a few seconds to think before each answer. Ready? Here we go. Question 1. Where did the Homestead Strike of 1892 take place? A. At the Carnegie Steel plant near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. B. At a railroad yard in Chicago, Illinois. C. At a coal mine in West Virginia. D. At a shipyard in Baltimore, Maryland. The correct answer is A. At the Carnegie Steel plant near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Question 2. Which union did the Homestead Mill workers belong to? A. The Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers. B. The American Federation of Labor. C. The Knights of Labor. D. The United Mine Workers of America. The correct answer is A. The Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers. Question 3. What nickname did workers give the fenced-in mill with watchtowers and barbed wire? A. Fort Frick. B. Steel Bastion. C. The Iron Citadel. D. Carnegie Keep. The correct answer is A. Fort Frick. Question 4. What happened when about 300 Pinkerton agents arrived by barge on the Monongahela River? A. They were met by a tense confrontation that turned into hours of gunfire. B. They peacefully negotiated a new contract with the workers. C. They immediately arrested the union leaders without resistance. D. They were escorted into the mill by the state militia. The correct answer is A. They were met by a tense confrontation that turned into hours of gunfire. Question 5. How did the strike end in the Scripps account? A. Governor Robert Pattison sent in the state militia, the company reopened with non-union labor, and the union was crushed. B. The workers won recognition for their union and took control of the plant. C. Andrew Carnegie personally intervened to restore the old contract. D. A federal court ordered the mill to shut down permanently. The correct answer is A. Governor Robert Pattison sent in the state militia, the company reopened with non-union labor, and the union was crushed. That's a wrap on this one. Thanks for sticking with us all the way through, quiz and all. If you liked it, hit subscribe so the next episode lands automatically. I'm Cyril, this was the Quiz Fix, and we'll be back soon with another true story worth knowing.